Hello again, Struck Co-op. The Juggler 2.0 Barbarian build is ready for launch. Stronger, better, with an added focus on Thorns on top of the already existing focus on swapping weapons and the walking arsenal passive. So why the added Thorns bonus, maybe you might ask? Hopefully with this video you would be able to understand why I decided to go with this focus. And there are just some synergies there that Blizzard has added in a way that makes you want to take the added Thorns focus for this build. The thing I'm not a big fan of is how bleeding is attached to Thorns as a synergy. I wish I wouldn't need to go for bleeding when I'm going for Thorns, so there's a lot of changes to this build and a lot of things that I personally would have done differently if I were to design how Thorns works and in which skills and with what mechanics it works as a synergy. Needless to say, ready for launch, Juggler 2.0 Barbarian build. We have skill trees, unique gear, legendary aspects, sockets and gems, gear rows, and Paragon Boards, all in this one neat video. So I hope you enjoyed. Buckle up, struck up, and let's go. Step number one is talking about the skill trees. It's the stuff that you see from the very beginning of the game, and it's the general direction your build will take is decided by the skill tree. After that, you're synergizing everything else to fit it. Play. I decided to use it because of bleeding. There are other things that have bleeding, such as Winging Strike, but Flay is where the Thorns is. And since I said I want to add it as a Thorns setup, that's why I decided, okay, let's do that one. Then there's Rend. Again, it doesn't have Thorns, but it has bleeding. It has extending the duration of vulnerable on enemies, which is amazing. And whether you go for increased damage to vulnerable or whether you go for Fury Generation is entirely up to you. Then there's Pressure Point. Core skills have chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. Pretty solid. Now, when it comes to Ground Stomp, by the way, those are the icons of Flay, Rend, Ground Stomp, Challenging Shout. We're not taking a Brawling skill. We're taking, as you can see, Steel Grasp and the Iron Maelstrom, the one ultimate that fits the weapon swapping arsenal kind of setup. So Ground Stomp, I prefer strategic Ground Stomp because for this build it will be all about using your ultimate as much as possible. Getting stuff that gives cooldown reduction would be definitely nice. So maximum life is needed because Thorns scales on your maximum life in most of the cases. Here damage reduction against elites definitely must have in my opinion to take. Outburst, again Thorns for each maximum life you have. This thing I just mentioned. And then toughest nails increase your thorns by 9%. When enemies hit you, they take an additional 10% of your thorns as bleeding damage over 5 seconds. Again, they're synergizing thorns and bleeding. And Challenging Shout is nice to give us that damage reduction, to also give us bonus maximum life. Again, helps greatly with that one. And also to give us thorns equal to 30% of the maximum life. So we get 20% multiplicative and 30%. That seems to be maybe additive. There is no plus, but there is no X either. Just from this one, on top of getting the damage reduction. And that's why Booming Voice to increase the duration of our shout skill by 24% is a must-have. Then we have Pit Fighter, which again, increase damage to close enemies and gain 6% distant damage reduction. Then there's Slaying Strike, 22.5 increase damage against injured enemies. And over here, if you see, we've got this one, pose vulnerability. It would be nice to put maybe a point there, but I couldn't get the point, so I decided to not take it. So thick skin is nice. Each time you take direct damage 45 for X of your base life, and then counter offensive, while you have 45 for over 50% of your maximum life, deal increased multiplicative damage. And then with Iron Maelstrom, again, you would fully need to commit to using all of your types of weapons for at least a single skill. So dual wielding, slashing, bludgeoning. Slashing, obviously, the easy choice would be to go on Rend. For bludgeoning, you could decide ground stomp maybe. It would fit well because it's a stunning skill. Flay, I would recommend using dual wielding on Flay. But enhanced Flay It works better with two-hander, so I would actually do most likely two-handed slashing on Flay again. And then there is Steel Grasp as well, a challenging shout. But let's say Steel Grasp could be your dual wielding, or it could be challenging shout. One of those two you could do challenging shout, or in the dual wield, or in the worst case, you do Flay as the burgeoning, Rend as the slashing, and then with the dual wielding, you go for ground stomp. In the worst case, you could do something like that. And Steel Grasp has lower cooldown than ground stomp, so keep that in mind too. And while I didn't take this additional charge, let's actually talk about it. Steel Grasp, it also makes enemies vulnerable, key thing to have. And then since we don't have much berserking in this build, I would rather take Fighter Steel Grasp so we can get some berserking added for the bonuses. Um, it is not a berserking build, but having a little bit of it might be more convenient than having an extra charge on Steel Grasp. We do have an item that gives us extra charge of Steel Grasp, so keep that in mind. And yeah, the Iron Maelstrom, definitely committing to this setup. It's the best ultimate, I guess, to work with the Walking Arsenal. Key passive, heavy-handed 3 points and the 2 remaining points into Brute Force. You could try and remove 1 point from elsewhere to get 1 more point in Brute Force, by the way. It won't be a bad choice. And Walking Arsenal dealing direct damage with a two-handed burgeoning, two-handed slashing, dual-wielded weapon grants you 10% multiplicative increased damage for 6 seconds. Those are separate bonuses. So that means you can stack them for 30%. And when you have all those 3 bonuses active, you get additional 15%, which is 45%. Nowhere near as good as some other Barbarian bonuses, such as this one that gives you 135 multiplicative, obviously for the 100% increased Fury cost. There is one item that I recommend as a strong priority. If hopefully you get it, definitely get that one. There is 100,000 steps, which is boots. I think it looks better if I show it from here. So yeah, attacks reduce evades cooldown by X seconds. After gaining the final damage bonus from the Walking Arsenal key passive, you automatically cast Ground Stomp and gain 32 to 50 Fury. But this cannot happen more than once every 30 seconds. So you'll be having extra automatic casts of Ground Stomp every 30 seconds, which is pretty fun. On top of that, you get a bunch of decks. You get damage with skills that swap to a new weapon, increase damage to stunned enemies. Again, very good combo with the Ground Stomp. And ranks of Ground Stomp, mind you, as well. Now, there are 3 other unique items that are good for this build. Later in the aspect segment, you would see where those unique items go and how the aspects are reworked when you do that. But Ancient's Oath, damage to healthy enemies, Steel Grasp launches 2 additional chains. Enemies hit by Steel Grasp are swallowed for 3 seconds. Then damage to bleeding, vulnerable damage, berserking skill damage, and ranks to Steel Grasp. On top of that, the Harlequin's crest, I advise people to take that on any build. Plus 2 ranks to all skills, damage reduction, and cooldown reduction. Massively good stuff. And the best thing about it is crafting material drop rate, which there are not many places from where you can get this. And on Helltides, this is a must-have item for Helltides, even if you don't use it outside of them. It also gives you maximum life, which again, massive, nice bonus there. Then Rage of Harugat is one of the 2 armors with Thorns. Keep in mind the other one only gives Thorns, so it maybe would give much more than this. Maybe it would give 4, 5, 6 times, who knows, maybe 10 times the Thorns. But the only thing that the Razor Blade gives is Thorns. Some people might prefer that one than the Razor Blade. I am one of those people. But maybe the Razor Blade might be good enough and better than that one for a Thorns build. But this is not majorly Thorns build. It's mostly weapon swapping, but Thorns is the secondary and bleeding is the tertiary mechanic we're building around. Up to 20 to 40% chance to reduce the cooldown of your non-ultimate skills by 1.5 seconds when you inflict bleeding on elites. You get physical damage, you get critical chance with physical damage on elites, and then you get damage reduction from bleeding enemies on top of the thorns. Solid, nice items to fit for the build, all 4 of them. And now about the legendary aspects, as I said, there are certain ways of doing things and keep in mind, of course, when you equip a unique item, that means one aspect needs to get sacrificed and removed from the build. I've tried to make it as painless as possible, but there are some little painful reworks you need to do. For example, on the helmet, you have aspect of anemia or Harlequin crest. This is painless. Just remove anemia, put the crest. Then there's earthquake aspect and exploiter aspect on the amulet. Um, so Exploiter aspect will go there after you get 10,000 steps, which means 10,000 steps goes in the boots, exploiter goes in the amulet, and earthquake aspect is removed. Then for the chest, you have weapon master's aspect or rage of Harugat, that unique chest. Well, once the unique chest goes here, you need to put weapon master's aspect on the Guoths, which means Wind Striker aspect needs to be sacrificed. Then aspect of Tempering Blows is in the pens, no brainer here. Flaking aspect ring 1, Death Wish aspect ring 2, and then on the one-handed weapon, the main hand, aspect of the Prickling or Needle Flare aspect. Aspect of the Prickling might have been removed. I'm going to show you those aspects in a moment so you know what we're talking about. This might have been removed from the aspects from the game. Maybe they're planning on adding it as a unique item, who knows. That's why Needle Flare is a good choice here. Now, Earth Striker's aspect and accelerating aspect for the offhand. Accelerating aspect, I would recommend keeping it on the second, on the swashing two-handed weapon. It goes from the swashing until you get the unique axe, two-handed axe. After that, you remove Earth Striker and put accelerating in the offhand, in the dual-wielded offhand, so that you have room for that axe here. Then on the burgeoning weapon, I would suggest Scope Breaker. It even fits as a name. And again, this one is that way. Now, since you heard the arrangement, you saw the arrangement, this is what each aspect is. Wind Striker and Earth Striker seem extremely underwhelming on paper. That's why I added them in slots where I wouldn't mind sacrificing them once I get uniques. Yes, those are the few little aspects that we have that synergize with swapping weapons. This one gives you attack speed for 4 seconds, 22, maybe 40. Then this one gives you your next attack overpowers and deals 32x multiplicative overpower damage. But this one requires 6 swaps, this one requires 10 swaps. Doesn't seem that great, and it doesn't say that it stacks those bonuses. So there is that to consider. Accelerating, the reason why I want it to be in the two-handed SWAT temporarily is because it's great. It would benefit from that 100% bonus. So this 20% goes to 40 and the 40% goes to 80%. So that's a lot of attack speed increase after critting with the core skill. Then there's Scope Breakers, turning a bleeding enemy deals X damage of their total bleeding amount to them as physical damage. This one, needless to say, massive good stuff to have here on your Scope Breakers aspect. This is kind of working like a Rupture, except you're not using Rupture. But it's doing X amount of the bleeding damage as physical damage, which is perfect. Perfect thing to have there. Then Ground Stomp creates an earthquake, damaging enemies for X physical damage over Y seconds, and while standing in earthquakes, you deal multiplicative increased damage. I'm not sure how much that is. Let's see if they show it over here how much that is. Yeah, they're not saying. Where did it go? Actually, I think I removed this from here, but it is definitely a good, good one. You deal 5 to 15% increased damage while standing in it. Not as much, but still good temporarily to have it. And I personally think it's a nice synergy, but again, it's something that I don't know how good it will be. That's why I put it in a place where I wouldn't mind sacrificing and losing it. Aspect of Prickling, as I said, and aspect Needle Flare aspect. Uh, Both of those are Thorns, but this one most likely is removed from the game. I don't see it in any of the other people's calculators. I do have it on my lists, but maybe the data mined information showed that those were removed, maybe. So this one is still good. Thorns damage dealt has 20 to 40% chance to deal damage to enemies around you. Over this one, damaging an enemy with a core skill has up to 10% chance to grant Thorns for 5 seconds. Death Wish aspect grant Thorns while berserking. That's why I wanted some berserking out of my skills. Exploiter aspect, my favorite aspect as a general aspect. Increase crowd control duration and multiplicative increase damage to unstoppable. Weapon Master's aspect, that extra charge for our skill grasp. As well as damaging an enemy with the weapon mastery skill, in our case, skill grasp has chance to stun them. Then you have aspect of anemia. Direct damage against bleeding enemies has X chance to stun for 2 seconds. This one eventually we lose. And Slaking aspect wiki hit when you have a 30 to 50% chance to gain Fury when Rend deals direct damage to at least one bleeding enemy, which means it will work even on bosses. It will proc even on bosses. And then swapping weapons 6 times grants you N45. Again, this is a little underwhelming. People might want to replace it with something else, and I won't blame them. This looks um, underpowered as an aspect alongside those two. So all those swap related ones, pretty disappointing. As one would expect from the sockets and gems, I would be focusing on things like my favorite thing is the emerald, critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. It works amazingly well on bosses. But then there's things like the overpowered damage from the ruby for the weapon. Even crit strike damage to crowd controlled enemies while mobbing. Not as good on bosses, but for mobbing it's probably even better than the vulnerable one. Then there's amethyst, damage over time. Obvious synergy if you're using bleeding, needless to say. And one last resort might be skull or even diamond for ultimate skill damage. Although I wouldn't recommend on betting too much on the ultimate if you can't at least half its cooldown on theory. So for the armor, choice number one, maximum life. Life gives you thorns. There is also the thing that gives you thorns, which is the emerald. But I think betting on life and life giving you thorns should be better than getting directly thorns. That's why I put ruby as choice number one. Sapphire, not a bad thing, again. Not a bad thing to have sapphire for danger reduction while fortified, but my top choice would be ruby. Then skull, again, not that great of a choice. So ruby number one, second choice would be sapphire or emerald, and then third choice would be the skull in terms of tiers. And for the jewelry, diamond, unless you need certain resistances more than others. Regarding the gear rows, I've split them into two priority groups, high priority group and low priority group. There's 300 in total. I've tried to shorten it and I've gotten to like 41 different stats that are useful and work well with the build. Needless to say, those at the top of the high priority are not necessarily better than the ones at the bottom. I just don't have time to split them per slot and in order of priority. But it's important to keep in mind certain keywords will help you focus on what is good for the build. Obviously, damage is good. Crit chance, crit damage are good. Lucky hit chance is good. Overpower is good. Resistance to all elements is good. Bonuses to elites are good. Bonuses with certain type of damage, with certain groups of skills. Bonuses against vulnerable enemies, vulnerable damage increase, close enemies related bonuses as well. And again, overpower bonuses. And now let's talk about and 45 bonuses. Let's talk about some of those keywords. Um, Keyword for the types of damage: physical, slashing, and bludgeoning damage, or physical, slashing, and bludgeoning skills, or weapons. Those three keywords are important. When it comes to the categories of skills, core is the one you want the most. Ultimate, maybe the second one. And basic, either second or third as well. While weapon mastery is the list of your priority, and defensive, you don't even want bonuses to crit chance, crit damage with defensive. You want ranks to defensive. But when it comes to ranks, core is high priority, then it's ultimate, if it even exists. Basic is then the priority, then is weapon mastery, then is defensive skills. When it comes to categories of ranks to certain skills of that category, this is the priority from left to right. Ranks to skills specifically: Rend, high priority; Flay, second priority; Steel Grasp, third priority; Ground Stomp, the next priority; and then Challenging Shout, the last priority. Although Ground Stomp and Challenging Shout, and even Steel Grasp and Challenging Shout, might swap places depending on how much you like it. I think Challenging Shout being priority number 3 is not a bad way to do it. Lucky hit chance with physical, slashing, bludgeoning, again, those three types of damages. Again, those types of damages. And elites. You can have those types of damage against elites. You can have crit chance with those types of damages against the elites. And there's also damage after killing an elite, and reduction after killing an elite for X seconds. And again, crowd control related bonuses exist as well. Obviously, a lot of good stuff. There's also overpower with a specific weapon type: slashing, two-handed, axes, bludgeoning, etc. Those would work nice as well. There's also overpower with a certain category that could work, and overpower with a specific skill. Again, Rend, Flay, Steel Grasp, etc. As usual, I have stage number 1 and stage number 2. If we look at the final stage, stage number 2, spending the points, we have a ton of bonuses such as armor, damage reduction from enemies that are bleeding, damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, damage reduction while healthy, damage to bleeding enemies, damage with two-handed slashing, fury on kill, increased bleeding damage, core skills deal increased crit strike damage, skill that swap to a different weapon deal increased damage, increased damage to close targets, increased damage while wielding an axe. The unique item of choice is an axe for me. Increased overpower damage, life, maximum fury, overpower damage. Again, more this and this they stack obviously. Physical damage over time, and vulnerable damage. Those are the stats we are taking. Pretty solid. How do we get to those numbers? Well, this is how. This is how we get to those numbers. First, we obviously start with the starting board, taking strength here, taking this, and this time around, I'm not skipping this extra life. Normally, I would skip this one to save myself a point. In this case, life is good for us. So strength, willpower, etc. And we're unlocking this one and putting cleaver off the bat, which means if you're not using an axe yet at this point, you either might want to consider making it so that you're using one, or you might want to put a different socket temporarily, such as there is one that gives you the same bonuses but with swords, and there's the one it's called seeding. There's also one that gives you the same bonuses with maces. Keep in mind, this doesn't mean two-handed axe. It means axe. It could be an axe in your dual wielding. It could be a two-handed axe, and also it gives you increased crit strike damage while wielding an axe. I would strongly recommend while using this to have in your dual wielding setup one axe, one-handed, and to also have a two-handed swashing axe instead of a polearm or a sword. Then you're moving on this side, taking this strength on the way, and doing something like this. While doing this, you're taking those physical damages, you're taking this extra physical damage and strength, and most of all, you're feeling those 40 strength for the secondary bonus before you move on to the next board of choice, which is Bone Breaker. We're not going for the Bone Breaker legendary. We're just focusing on the sockets and getting stuff around the sockets. Since we want to be close to this damage with two-handed bludgeoning, in case we want to take it later and overpower damage, I am entering through here instead of through this side. Same points, so just differently spent. Then we're doing this 1, 2, 3. Now we start the dex. This is a dex board, as you can see. Well, it's not a dex board, but it's a board with a lot of dex, and I made it into a dex board by slotting rat. For every 5 dex purchase within range, core skills deal increased critical strike damage. And this is obviously when you max out at rank 20. At rank 1, it would be like 2-3% or so. Still decent though. So skills that critically strike generate 3 fury, additional bonus. Lovely. Now, as you can see, we've gotten 49 decks. I would suggest going here, taking the socket first. After that, this dex is right next to you. After that, you can go and take this int, then those two dexes, then this overpower damage, overpower damage, overpower damage, and strength. And next choice would be willpower here, overpower damage, damage reduction while healthy dex, and then you need to put that 1 point here, by the way, I forgot about it, into vigor. Then you have healthy and dex. Maybe over here I also might have forgotten to put it, which means one thing will be removed, and there are things that one can sacrifice for it. I'll fix it later so we don't waste much time in doing it now. Next up, you go up this one, strength dex, and then you take this willpower, strength, and this dex, and that should make you full with that board. Moving on to the next board, which is the Warbringer. You're connecting it in this way, rotating it in that way, and you're entering through here. This means you go here, dex, int, dex, boom, socket, mortal draw, a dex socket. If you haven't noticed, 49 dex for this one. With 25, you get swapping weapons, has 18% chance to cause the skill damage to critically strike. For every 5 dex purchased within range, skills that swap to a different weapon deal 16.824 increased damage. Now, since we've entered through here, we'll go for this physical damage strength, this physical damage, this dex, and this physical damage first. Next, we wanna take this dex, strength, dex. After that, strength, dex, strength, dex, dex. And then you leave the board from this side in this way, opening up the way in case you wanna swat points there. So you're close to it, and again, here we're close to this one if you wanna take it. Next, we're going from this side, taking the decimator board. But before we take decimator, we want to get the socket first, and we're entering through here. For this one, we're using dominate, which increases the overpower damage by 28.8 for each 5 willpower. After not overpowering for 30 seconds, your next attack will overpower. Which again, this is not the best bonus to have. 30 seconds is a long time. Still, we want the previous one. And now we take this willpower, this damage to vulnerable, this one, and then swat the socket. After you swat the socket, you take this willpower, this willpower, and then you're investing here, damage to vulnerable, vulnerable damage, strength, and vulnerable damage. Then this willpower, int, willpower, and next strength, willpower, int, willpower, strength, decimator. Two-handed slashing weapon attacks have up to 8% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. And you're taking it from here, so you're close to this vulnerable damage. rather than close to this life and stuff. And next board in order is Blood Rage. Entering through here, then you're doing this strength, willpower, dex, strength, socket. And in this socket, it's willpower, which is disembowel. For every 5 willpower within range, you deal 7 points to increase bleeding damage. So we do this strength, willpower, willpower, willpower. Damage reduction from enemies that are bleeding, willpower. Damage reduction from enemies that are bleeding, strength, and willpower. And then there is this one which we can take later. But if you say, okay, I don't want this one, this is your extra point. This is your extra point for that thing we took earlier, this one. So in this final setup, you will notice I didn't take this one, which would require 2 points. It's just not worth it for 7 point to bleeding. And then you take this point, and this is your point over here, so you can get this one. And problem solved. We're only losing 7 point to increase bleeding damage, but we're making sure we are connecting for this 16.44 crit strike damage, and we're also taking some strength and restoration while healthy on the way. So for this one, as you've seen, we're taking an interesting approach with it. You gotta enter through here again, and you gotta enter through this way, and then after that, you're feeling this damage to bleeding, damage to bleeding. You might want to take that one. If you want, you can take it, but then remove it later. Again, those two are actually not really needed. You don't need those damage to bleeding, so if you want to save 2 points, remove them. In the final setup, you can also remove them and decide to spend them elsewhere. They're not a must-have. Then over here, you take this dex and this willpower, and it will work. If you remove those 2 points, you can actually go back and check this one. But this would give you 7 points to increased bleeding damage, and it costs you 3 points. Which again, you only have 2 points. You only have 2 points left with this final setup. So since you're at this stage it's about filling. And for filling, I decided to connect the board on this side, which means the filling starts from here, from Decimator. You're going upwards, and you're taking those nodes. But before you exit, I would strongly recommend taking this cluster. Vulnerable damage and damage with two-handed swashing. After you take this cluster, you move on, you exit, you connect the hemorrhage board. You don't take hemorrhage because it's too far away to make it worth it. And you enter through here. This is, as you can see, another board for dex for us. You're entering from this way. And it's for every 5 dex, increased damage to close targets. And on top of that, the added bonus is damage reduction to close enemies. So after you take this, you go here, strength, dex, dex, dex. Then strength, dex, taking this cluster physical damage over time and some dex again. And after that, since this is close, 1 point and then boom, damage to bleeding enemies, physical damage over time, cluster. And now it's time to keep filling up the board with other things. Over here you have damage to vulnerable, and you can skip this armor and just go around and take the damage to vulnerable. Then other potential things, since again I said you have 2 remaining points, you can get some resistances if you need them, or some strength. Or you can get some extra damage reduction while healthy, or you can get some willpower if you really, really need it. Those 2 remaining class points, I'll leave them be as they are. There is this maximum fury someone might want to take. There is maybe you could want some other stats anywhere else. Again, we're close to this, but not close enough to make it worth it. Although some people might prefer getting the overpowered damage and sacrificing this fury related bonus. Again, I've opened up the possibilities. I've made it so that you're close to the fortify, close to this, close to that. And you decide whether you want those clusters, again, as well as this damage to elites cluster. It's easy to reach those clusters, so if you don't like the clusters I took, you can take the ones that are nearby and available, and make the build your own, and not follow the things as I did them 100%.
To get notified when I upload more content like this one or other builds and guides for Wooter and not so Wooter games, you can subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to not miss out on notifications. As well as keep in mind there's something called memberships on YouTube, which lets you be a paying member for my channel to get access to perks such as emotes and badges made by me, as well as the option to get one-on-one tutoring for the very basics of Adobe Photoshop, Premiere and After Effects. And memberships can be cancelled at any time if you no longer want to be a member. Thanks for watching all the way until the end. Struck up, keep it cool until next time, and goodbye.